Hi everyone, it's Kelly here. Welcome back to my channel if you've been here before, and welcome if this is your first time. So glad to have you. Today I am going to share with you the books that I read in the month of November and share my thoughts about those books. I have had an okay reading month, all things considered. So if you didn't know, my day job is I'm a teacher. And we are heading towards the end of the year. This is a pretty busy time. We're report writing and all the rest of those kind of things that need to kind of happen as the year concludes. So heading towards my summer break in the end of December and January, and I'm super keen and excited for that. But it has impacted my reading a little bit. But I did actually get, how many? I think maybe 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I read 7 books this month, so that's not too bad. A lot of audiobooks this month because I've had to sort of read on the go and just kind of keep myself moving along. But also some quite short ones, so we'll talk about these as we go in. But I've read one, what I've heard other people refer to as a middle grade, I'd call it like a junior fiction, so for younger readers book, and also one book that was I would say a short story. Yeah, probably a short story, maybe a novella. I'm not quite sure. I don't really know how you define those things. It's a little bit up in the air, I think. But anyway, that is what I have managed to get done this month in November. So I'm recording this at the beginning of December. Super keen to talk about these books with you. So the first one that I read in the month of November was She of the Mountains by Vivek Shraya. And this was a great start to the month because it ended up being a 5-star read for me. I loved this book. I listened to it as an audiobook, and then I've now acquired a physical copy of it because there are visuals in the book. And also it's quite interesting to kind of see, for example, these kind of things. So which I missed out on, obviously, as while reading it as an audiobook, because obviously they can't just describe a picture. I guess they could describe a picture, but they didn't. So one, I wanted to read it and see the images that went along with it. But also I was keen to see what this looked like as a book. And it's quite interesting because there are passages that are sort of almost look like poetry. And then there are passages that are more, more paragraphy. So yeah, it's quite interesting. Anyway, let me tell you about this book. I didn't know what I was getting into. It's an audiobook that I borrowed from my library, and I looked at it and I was like, oh, it's a short audiobook. I think it was sort of 4 to 5 hours, somewhere in that vicinity. So for an audiobook, that's quite short. So I thought, oh, you know what, let's just give this a go. It looks interesting. I'd borrowed it once before and just not gotten around to it. So I saw it again and thought, yeah, I think I'd like to see what this is all about. So essentially, it's got a reimagining of Hindu mythology, I guess is the right way to describe it. But alongside that reimagining, sort of almost like a dual timeline, but it's more just 2 stories that are linked in a weird way. There is the Hindu mythology, and then there's also a sort of modern timeline, and it's about a man who is discovering who he is as a person, and working through some stuff, basically. And I don't know how to describe this in a way that makes it sound as beautiful as it was, but to me, it was a combination of like the language that's in the book and just the interesting way that those 2 things wove together. Exploration of queerness, and also some of the way that our society wants to sort of put people into binary categories, male and female, gay and straight, and all of these things. And it's kind of exploring those places in between, and what it means to sort of be strong in your identity when you do sort of identify somewhere along that continuum, that isn't a hard one way or the other. So yeah, it was a really interesting exploration of that, but also really poetic and beautifully written, and just really, really compelling the whole way through. So yeah, I would highly recommend this book, She of the Mountains by Vivek Shraya. I had heard nothing about it going in. I haven't heard anybody talking about it, but I loved this book. It was an amazing start to my reading month. Then following on from that, I finished off a book that I was reading for a book club, and that is Journey by Moonlight by Antal, Szerb. Now, this book I have sort of had hanging around on my my monthly videos for a while now. So I was supposed to start reading this in October, just didn't get to it, and then made the final push and got it through in November because we extended our time with this book because all of us were struggling. However, this also was a book that I quite liked. I ended up giving it 3.75 stars. So it wasn't the best book I've ever read. But to me, the characters were very compelling, even though they were not particularly likable. I don't know that I liked anybody in this book. Maybe one. There was one character that sort of became a monk, and he was somewhat more likable, I think, than most of the other characters. But our main protagonists, not likable at all, really wishy-washy sort of character. And I was not in particular rooting for him, not in particular concerned about how things turned out for him. He seemed a bit like just wishy-washy and like one of those people that life just happens to. He's not he's just allowing life to ebb and flow around him and, just kind of going with the flow without sort of having much direction in terms of what he wants. And it's kind of exploring the fallout around him. So we start the story with he and his now new wife have just gotten married, and they are going to their honeymoon in Venice. So they're a Hungarian couple. This is a book that's translated from the Hungarian, and they've gone to Venice for their honeymoon, and we then find out via being told by our protagonist that he has a bit of an odd history with his friendship group from when he was, I guess, at high school, and that things kind of unfold in the retelling of that as the story goes on. So we sort of learn more and more about what happened back then and how it's still kind of affecting him today, and affecting his decision making and his inability to kind of move forward with his life. So even though it's a retelling, but it's and I guess in that way it is a dual timeline, but it's not in the sense of it, intentionally being a dual timeline, if that makes sense. It's more just him talking about what's happened, and remembering what had happened and kind of reflecting on what are the events of the past. But yeah, so he ends up kind of allowing a mistaken train journey. He's changing trains, or there's a pause in the train and he doesn't get back to the train in time before it leaves, and he just kind of allows that to unfold, instead of trying to somehow get back to his wife, and it's set, I believe, in the period between the world wars. That would be, if I'm remembering that correctly. I'm not seeing anything that's kind of jumping out at me to say that that's correct or not. But it's sort of a, in that period of time. So it's not like they had mobile phones or anything like that to be able to call each other and say, hey, I've missed the train, I'll catch you at the next one, you know. So yeah, it's this kind of unfolding journey that this man goes through as he kind of traipses around Italy, essentially. And then the resolution of this book is not particularly satisfying. Spoiler alert, sorry. I won't tell you exactly how it resolves, but I was not particularly satisfied. However, as things kind of started to unfold, I appreciated the character building and the sort of, you know, I was compelled. I wanted to know what happened and you know, why it was that these events had affected him so much. And also, I just really appreciated the author's I guess, sense of humor. Like, he wasn't taking himself that seriously. He was sort of, you know, he was looking at this character as a ridiculous character, as somebody that was not worthy of being liked as a character, and not taking that sort of man's journey kind of trope too seriously, you know, where it's an unsatisfying end to the journey. He's just wishy-washy. He's, you know, allowing life to kind of just happen to him, and we're just kind of along for the ride, as is his poor new wife. You know, so it's sort of just, it unfolds in that way. So I did end up enjoying it in the end. Not quite enough to give it a 4 or a 5 star, but I was almost a 4 for me. I did find his sense of humor, the author's sense of humor, quite enjoyable, and I guess that's also kudos to the translator Len Ricks as well, for being able to translate that humor too into the English. So Journey by Moonlight by Antal Szerb, translated by Len Ricks. I did enjoy it, and I think for me it's been good. So this book club that I'm part of, we're reading books from around the world, and often those are translated fiction. So I'm really appreciating kind of experiencing these books that are outside my comfort zone, I guess. They're also a little bit, you know, I'm getting to sample books from around the world, and this is a book that was written some time ago, so it's you know, considered a classic, and you know, being able to experience classics that were written in other languages translated into English, I think is a really valuable addition to my reading life. So I quite enjoyed Journey by Moonlight. Following on from Journey by Moonlight, I read Emma. So I'm also currently working my way through the Jane Austen novels. This was number 4, I believe. I've still got 2 more to go in December and January, and then I will be done with the novels that were finished by Jane Austen in her lifetime. So Emma, I ended up giving 3 stars. Now, I know that Emma is some people's favourite Austen. I don't know. There were aspects of it that I really enjoyed, and then there were aspects of it that bugged me a little bit. So it kind of got wrecked for me. I guess the bits that I did like about it got wrecked for me once again at the end. If you watched my wrap up from last month when I was reading, I think it was Persuasion. Yeah, I think it was, no, it wasn't Persuasion. What was I reading last month? It was Mansfield Park. I was reading Mansfield Park last month, and this exact same thing happened. We've got older guy, younger woman, and creepy sentiment that at the time may not, you know, and again, like I have tried to read these books without my moral judgments of the present, trying not to let those affect my enjoyment of the book and you know, to judge them on those standards. However, okay, I'm going to read the sentence to you, and again, this is a bit of a spoiler because this happens right at the end, but I'm going to read it to you anyway. So this is the older man speaking to Emma, the character, at the end when they're basically professing their love for one another. And he says to her, I could not think about you you much without doting on you, faults and all, and by dint of fancying so many errors, have been in love with you ever since you were 13 at least. And to me, like, that's just creepy. It's creepy and it's wrong. That's a child. A 13-year-old is a child. And I'm sorry, but you know, at the time, he was much older than her. It's not a, you know, schoolgirl, schoolboy crush. That's a man falling in love with a 13-year-old child. And to me, that just kind of, any positives that came out of that relationship are just completely undermined by the fact that he's been in love with her since she was a child, a 13-year-old child. So, you know, it just, okay, I'm going to move on. It's gross. It's gross and it's yucky, but let's move on. Taking that out. So I did dock point, at least a point for that. And then I guess the other thing that is that I don't really love the protagonist of Emma. Yes, she does experience growth as a person throughout the book. And I guess she's intentionally being painted as, you know, having these ideas that are not right. And that we are kind of laughing at her a little bit with the certainty that she has in who's right for who and the matchmaking that she's doing between friends. And, you know, we are supposed to laugh at her. We're supposed to find it amusing, but I just didn't. I just found it annoying. And yeah, she was not my favorite. So I'm very sorry to those people who love Emma above all other Austens. It was not my favorite Austen. My favorite Austen is still Pride and Prejudice. I have to say it's probably the least problematic of all of the Austen books that I have read so far, followed probably at this point by Sense and Sensibility. But I did not like Mansfield Park. This was okay, but not my favorite. So that was Emma. It was a little disappointing. It's also quite long. So I'm excited that for December and January, the two last books that I need to read are the shorter Austen. So I'm hoping, my fingers are crossed, that I'm going to enjoy them more than I have enjoyed Emma. Okay, then I'm on to books that I don't have a physical copy of because I read two books. The first one was The Kiss Quotient, and that's by Helen Hoang. And I read this as an ebook, and then I started listening to it as an audiobook but didn't like the audiobook, so then I switched and just read it as an ebook, and that was more enjoyable for me. I've ended up giving The Kiss Quotient 3 stars. I really feel like I found it difficult to suspend my disbelief. I was really excited to read this book because it's a book where the protagonist in this romance book, and I have to say, I don't 100% know that modern romances are for me. So factor that into what I'm saying right now. I'm not sure that they're really for me. But even outside of that, I found, so I was excited to read this book because it's written, the protagonist in the story is autistic, and it's written by an autistic author. So I was excited to read this book for that reason, to see an autistic person centered in this romance. And I just, at times, there were aspects of this book that were quite touching in terms of the relationship that the two main characters build. And then other times it was just ridiculous, and it meant that I really couldn't suspend my disbelief in this book. I couldn't really feel absorbed in the book in the way that I wanted to, because just some of the stuff that goes on and is said, you know, the way that they speak to one another, I just felt was a bit unbelievable, which was disappointing because I wanted to enjoy this book, and I did. It wasn't dreadful by any stretch of the imagination. I've read dreadful, cheap romance books that I've 100% hated in the past, but and this was not one of those. But it was not the best book I've read this year. It was not great. So I was really quite disappointed and ended up giving it 3 stars. The next one that I read is Silver in the Wood, which is by Emily Tesh, and it's the first book in a duology. I believe the duology is called the Green Man duology. But I 100% loved this book. It was amazing. I gave it 4.25 stars. I really enjoyed the characters in this book. So we begin with, oh gosh, I can't even remember the names of the characters. It would have been helpful, Kelly, if you had written down the names of the characters on your post-it notes so that you could talk more intelligently about the book that you have read. So we begin with a character who is essentially the Green Man. He's a character who this man who has been looking after this patch of woodland for more than the lifetime of a regular human being. And the house kind of moves. It's not always in the same place. He speaks to dryads and, is dealing with these sort of supernatural elements, and basically protecting the people in the town that live nearby to this woods, and just generally protecting the woods as well. And then he meets the new owner of the manor house that is attached to these woods. That introduction begins to change things in the woods, and also just in terms of how things are playing out in the story. It was so enjoyable. I really loved it, and I am very excited to read the second book, which I've already got on my ebook, on my e-reader. So I'm really, really keen to get to that, and I think, try to get to that early next year, because I've got a lot of books to read in December, which you'll find out when you watch my December TBR. So I think, but perhaps I will. Perhaps I will get to it in December, because I would like to conclude the story or pick these characters back up again, and to sit with them again in the next short story, to kind of stay in that world for a little bit longer. So yeah, I really, really recommend it. It was really good. Silver in the Wood by Emily Tesh. The next book that I read was my junior fiction or middle grade book, and for the month, which was The Queen's Nose by Dick King-Smith. Now, Dick King-Smith is the author who wrote The Sheep Pig, which was turned into the movie Babe back in the day, which is such a good book as well. So if you haven't read that book, you really should. It's great. I read it, I think maybe last year or the year before, and I loved it. I 100% loved it. It was great. He's a really, really good author, in terms of, well, he's a good author anyway, but he's also, I think, particularly good with the way that he talks about animals in his books. So this is not an animal-based book, although there are a few animals in here. It's a book about a girl called, what is her name? Is she called Harmony? I think Harmony's the sister. No, Harmony. It is Harmony. Her name is Harmony. And she... Oh, hello. Excuse me a moment. What are you doing? Okay. So, Harmony is a girl who's maybe about 10 or so. She lives in England with her family, and they get a visit from an uncle who lives abroad. I believe he lives in India, and he comes to visit them. And her family are generally quite kind of a very straight sort of family, like, meat and 3 veg kind of people, if that makes sense. Maybe that's not a thing that other people say. I don't know. They're, the type of people who are very normal, just normal people. And Harmony is a bit of a wild child in the sense of, she's quite rude to her sister. She is a bit scruffy. She likes to hang out in nature and with animals and all of these kind of things. She doesn't really fit in with her family. And then this uncle, who she calls Uncle Ginger, comes to visit, and she's only met him for the first time because, as I said, he lives in India. So when she meets him, she sort of finally feels like everything makes sense, and that, that's who she takes after in the family is Uncle Ginger. So they have this really great connection, and they are just a really sweet little pair that hang out together. And he gives her a gift as he's about to head back to India, and he gives her a gift, which she goes on this kind of like a little hunt, like a treasure hunt type of thing. He's left clues for her, and it turns out it's just a 50p piece, and she's like, a 50p piece. But is it just a normal 50p piece? No, it's not. It's magical. And it can grant wishes. So then it's sort of like her just kind of working out what she's going to wish for, and, sort of the consequences of those wishes as things kind of go along. So it's really, it's a really sweet book. It is magical and funny, as it says on the front cover here. This edition, my history with this book, this is a reread for me, but I haven't read it for a very long time. This exact edition, not this book, but this edition was the book that I first found in my school library when I was in primary school. So I would have been probably about the same age as the character here, maybe about 10 years old, maybe a bit younger. And I borrowed this book from my school library and loved it back then. And then maybe, I don't know, I must have been maybe about 20 or so. And then I remembered the book and I wanted to read it again. I couldn't find a copy. So I wrote away to a store called Berkelo Books, and they have, at the time at least, had a bookfinding service for rare books, because at the time it was not in publication anymore, and they managed to find this copy for me. It subsequently has been republished, so you can just get a normal copy just from regular booksellers or online now, but back then you couldn't. So yeah, I was very excited to get a copy of this book and to finally, because this was some time ago that I acquired this, but to finally reread this book and to have enjoyed it as much as I did back when I was a little girl. So I ended up giving this one 5 stars and was very, very happy to get to it once again. And the final book that I read for the month is another one I don't have a physical copy of. It's called Soil by Matthew Evans, who's an Australian author who I believe started out in food writing and has subsequently come along and become a writer of his own, who has written several books, and this is one of them. Now, Soil, it's non-fiction, and it is about soil, as in the stuff that stuff grows out of. So you would think not a particularly interesting topic, but I was really surprised and by how much that I learnt about soil and about the environment. So he kind of looks at soil from a scientific point of view, from a historic point of view, the interaction between soil and other things, and also looking at it from a climate point of view and a practical point of view too. So looking at the ways in which soil is used, the problems with soil that we are experiencing now. He looks at it from the perspective of home gardeners, as well as farmers, as well as companies that utilize the land, and he's exploring it from all of these different perspectives and really just giving you the lowdown on soil and the problems that we are experiencing now as a global population because of the ways that we have used the earth, and the farming system, mass farming, and all of those kind of things, how we've degraded the soil via monoculture planting, and not allowing the earth to rest, leaving earth bare, tilling the soil, all of those things that have had an impact on soil. And I have learned so much about it, and I really, really enjoyed this book. I ended up giving it 4 stars. Again, I listened to this one as an audiobook, and really, really enjoyed it. So I'd highly recommend it. It was a very interesting read, particularly for people who are into gardening or who are perhaps interested in the climate crisis. Well, we should all be interested in the climate crisis, but who are, wanting to learn more about the climate crisis, because I really think this book comes at that from a really interesting angle. And explains some of the problems that are caused by things that you might not realize are causing those problems. So really, really enjoyable read, and something that I think will sit with me for a very, very long time. So 7 books done in the month of November. I have very much enjoyed most of them, some more than others, of course, but was really pleased to have 2 5-star reads this month, and to just have had basically a very enjoyable reading month with no particular duds. So yeah, very enjoyable month. Thank you very much for being here and for stopping by my channel. I hope you've heard about some books today that perhaps you haven't read before and would like to check out, or have just learned something new about soil. I hope I've been able to provide that service for you. Anyway, I'll leave it there, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.